If you're just joining, you're watching Daybreak on Trust TV. And if you didn't join us from the beginning, do well to follow the conversation on our live stream on YouTube at Trust TV. Moving on to the discussion. 1st October 1960, Nigeria was granted full independence from Great Britain. The country received its Freedom Charter on the 1st of October from Princess Alexandra of Kent, the Queen's representative, at the Nigerian independence ceremonies. In 1953, Enahoro became the first to move the motion for Nigeria's independence, which was eventually granted in 1960 after several political setbacks and defeats in the parliament. Enahoro has been regarded by academics and many Nigerians as the father of the Nigerian state. In 1901, Nigeria was made a British protectorate and was colonized until 1960, when the country gained independence. And in 1963, Nigeria became a republic, but fell under military rule in 1966 as a result of a coup d'etat in 1967. The Republic of Biafra was formed, and this led to 3 years of Nigerian civil war. The land area known today as Nigeria was formed in 1914 when colonial authorities merged the northern and southern protectorates of Nigeria to form the amalgamated protectorate and colony named Nigeria. There is so much to learn about Nigeria, its people and its cultures. With so much history and cultural richness, there are many lessons to be learned from Nigeria's impact on the African continent and the world at large. Global Citizen celebrates the resilience and ingenuity of Nigerian people on this historic and important day. Now, to tell us more on Nigeria's history is Professor Sharif Gali Ibrahim, the head Department of Political Science and International Relations, University of Abuja, here in the FCT. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, Nigerians.
And a happy independence in advance.
Happy independence.
Yes, indeed. So maybe you should just start by chronicling, because I love history and I love to listen, to storytelling. So just take it away for us.
All right. Nigeria belongs to this particular great continent of Africa, situated within the West Africa sub-region. And Nigerians have been living together with their, African brothers and sisters when Africa was actually borderless, prior to the advent of the European colonialists. Like if you look at Niger Republic, Benin, Cameroon, Nigeria, we've been one people, because there were no borders, so to say, defined as what constituted Nigeria or Cameroon. Not until the Berlin Conference of 1918, in which the Europeans sat down together, took coffee and tea, and decided to actually, partition Africa. The British took over. So British West Africa, British East Africa, places like Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Gambia, and the rest of them. While the French took a kind of a lion share, so to say, in West Africa, looking at, for example, Senegal, Mali, Togo, Benin, Mauritania, Guinea, and other parts of Central and Eastern Africa. So this has been the foundation. When this particular colonial domination started, in some places Africans decided to resist and protest, and they fought against it. Places like Angola, Rhodesia, South Africa, and many more other places. In some places, the Europeans discovered that there was no need to actually deploy forces or even weaponize the process of colonialism, because already there was a kind of well-arranged political system and authority, such as in northern Nigeria, decentralized political system. So the British, for example, introduced what is known as the indirect rule, which is popularly known as the British colonial policy. This apart, so many factors precipitated the quest for freedom and liberation by African elite as well as African founding fathers. And they negotiated. They've been attending conferences, you know, in the colonial capitals, you know, in London and other places. And that is what brought us to the issue of Enahoro, you know, when you made mention 1957. So Africans began to actually earn independence, some through, it is called on a platter of gold, some through violent process, how the people of Angola suffered, how the people of Rhodesia suffered, how the people of South Africa suffered just to actually get decolonized as well as liberated. So this is a part. The new state began to emerge. This new state, especially in Africa, having, you know, to get their freedom and political independence, so to say, which according to critics, it was just a mere flag independence. Why a mere flag independence? Critics believe that political independence without economic independence is actually rubbish, because the actual freedom that you'll be allowed to deal with your resources, you know, your system of production, you know, were actually limited. So that is why, but people like Nkrumah, because in that particular era, the African founding fathers or the elite, people like Kenyatta, you know, in Kenya, people like Nyerere in Tanganyika, people like, you know, Zik, Awolo, Sardona, the Balewas, you know, the Kaitas, people in Burkina Faso like Sankara and the rest of them. So these people appreciated as well as understood the virtues of the African people, and decided to liberate Africa, to actually make Africa devoid of clutches of colonialism and any form of domination.
Prof,
and that is why
I like the fact that you're unpacking all of this for us, and it's very interesting. But one thing that pricked my curiosity is the fact that Eastern Africa got independent before some of the countries in Western Africa. What led to that, and why did we see some of these countries in West Africa gaining independence almost at the same time? Is this something we didn't do right, or we were not strong enough to actually pull ourselves from the hold of the British?
That is because, you know, if you look at West Africa historically, there were no, if not, you know, in some cases in Nigeria, such as the Aba Women Riot, as well as the initial protests from Lagos down to the eastern region, there were no a kind of protest, you know, in Western Africa as what constituted colonialism, because indirect rule was actually imposed, you know, especially in Nigeria, in Ghana, not to think of the French, you know, assimilative policy. While in British East Africa, there were movements such as the Mau Mau movement in Kenya. The Mau Mau movement, people actually rose against the British colonialists, just like what happened in India. You know, during Gandhi, people actually rose to protest against the British colonial subjugation, and through which Gandhi preached the gospel of non-violent, you know, reaction to the colonial rule. So that is why we witness such I mean, traverse, as well as the emergence of new states in Eastern Africa, while in Western Africa we had so many of such states, you know, crossing the hurdles of colonialism in order to be liberated. So this apart, these people had one belief, especially in Nyerere of Tanganyika. He believed that nationalism without Pan-Africanism was also inefficient.
So this brings me to my own question. Are we losing real Pan-Africanists? Because while we talk about working for a greater Nigeria, there is also the need to talk about working towards having a greater Africa. Have we lost the voices and people who should imbibe the essence of the likes of Zeke, the likes of Nelson Mandela, the likes of a lot of all of these individuals who had giving blood, sweat, and tears to ensure that Africa unites and Africa be great.
The historical trajectories, if you critically have an eagle view on them, you come to internalize that even prior to independence, the struggle for the liberation of Africa, it was actually held in a kind of a watertight structuration. Why did I say this? Is because the South Africans were struggling to liberate South Africa, the Nigerians were struggling to liberate Nigeria, the Ghanaians, you know, and the rest of them.
Everybody was focused with
yes, on his own nation. So that is why Nyerere made this particular position clear. The look, we are so engrossed in fighting and struggling to liberate our own entities and colonies, but we should actually put it, you know, behind our minds that if we do such struggle, it is actually ineffective. Why? Because the common goal should be the liberation of the entire continent of Africa, and Nigeria has pursued this as its foreign policy objective, the liberation of the entire continent of Africa, and that is why it aided Rhodesia, it aided even South Africa, it aided so many entities. So placing the centrality of Nigeria's foreign policy on Africa was to aid African states hitherto under colonial domination to gain freedom and independence. So that is why Nyerere believed that we shouldn't actually individually fight or struggle for this particular liberation, that I'm fighting for Nigeria alone. No, we should actually work all together for Africa. And that is why you know, Nkrumah had also played a greater role, who also preached for a united Africa. But concurrently, as we speak, so many people in Africa have lost focus of Africa as an entity. Everybody is struggling because developmental crisis has actually made us to be oblivious of the African cause. Everybody is actually trying to focus on how do we grow, how do we develop. But unfortunately, we have a very, you know, a drastic force that is inimical to such progress and development of individual states of Africa. And that's what Frantz Fanon called white men in black skin. The colonialists have actually left Africa. You know, we have the political independence, but we will be left with our own brothers who are white men in black skin, who even exploit Africans or even Nigerians more than the colonialists, the white men even exploited. Because the white men never disallowed us from going to school. We were being forced to go to school. But today we are being forced to get out of school. You know, the white men, the white colonialists allowed us to go to hospitals, appreciate the provisions of, you know, medical system. But today, people are disallowed, you know, to even go to the hospital.
You spoke about forces now. Yeah. You know, the uprise in coup matters, you can, you know, attribute it to some of the traces of the white men. We've got independence. At some point, some countries have to turn into the democratic rules. But we still see, you know, these foreign actors still playing out in some of the decisions that we make in Africa. And then the recent coup that has been, you know, making rounds in a lot of African countries. Why do we have this happen? Is this something that we've done in the past, or we did not do the right thing by taking independence? Or could you say that we took independence too early?
No, it's not really taking independence too early. It's a kind of systemic approach to dealing with Africa as well as developing states. We should actually recall that imperialism is still playing a role, you know, in the global system. When you say globalization, globalization in the parlance is imperialism, because it is the universalization of European economy, the universalization of European politics, the universalization of European culture. You know, having Africans embracing European culture, wearing, even fixing weavons and the rest of them, refusing or rejecting even our own cultural, values. So that's the xenocentric, mentality that has actually been bedeviling African people. So what am I saying here is that the imperialist structure is that you have independence, colonialism has been abolished, the hitherto slave era has actually withered, but now you have the independence, but you have the highest level of capitalism. The highest level of capitalism, you have multinational corporations, you have the media, you have everything that emanates from the Western world, which condition your life, your daily life. And what you are meant to understand is that what you produce, what you consume, are actually European made. Whatever you do, even your political system, because those who contest for elections are actually being funded, some of them, by these multinational corporations. And if they get power, they get elected, now they are to be dictated by this particular European multinationals. Why? Because we have interest. We have paid for you, we have funded your elections, and now it is time for you to also give us a fair play. You give us a ground in which we can actually also play our own role and tap from your own national resources. It is kind of a divider rule as well as sharing formula. And Africans, that is why I say white men in black skin. Most of our politicians are like that because they dance according to the tunes of the Europeans. And that is why the liberation of Africa was not just the former colonial struggle through nationalist struggle to liberate Africa. It's a continuous process. Why? Because we found ourselves under a systemic utter domination, of globalization and capitalism. So that is why these young revolutionaries you are seeing rising, they are gradually having that particular spirit, not necessarily say Pan-Africanist spirit, nationalist spirit. Why? Because the Gabonese struggle and they seized power, in order to actually deal with Gabon. The Burkinabes, the Malians, the Nigerians, they took power in order to deal with their individual national issues and make sure that corrections are actually made. So, but not for the entire continent of Africa. So that is the issue of imperialism that we still experience. But this has been exacerbated by the impediment, of developmental crisis. Why? Because we are not developed, we are not industrialized, and that has actually made us to be dependent on Western Europe, even Asia today. So these issues, since independence, should have been corrected. That is why immediately after independence, the First Republic emerged, and we began to have a kind of the era of Nigeria's construction, because Nigeria became to be constructed. 1960, 1963 till 1966. The political leaders, under the leadership of Balewa Zik, as well as their cohorts, people like Sardona of Sokoto, they constructed Nigeria. Not until the emergence of military interregnum. The military made Nigeria to witness era of suspension. Suspension in the sense that the Nigeria's constitution was subjected to perpetual suspension. Laws were being passed by decrees. And that is why this particular era followed the era of Nigeria's construction, and that construction continued. Why? Because we had so many schools built, since the time of First Republic. We had schools established, we had so many infrastructure built up. Now the military continued. Remember, it was Gowon that first established the practical structure of true federalism by creating 12 states when he actually plotted the coup against Ironsi. That was July 27 July 1966. So when it continued, Murtala Mohammed came and established or created 7 additional states. So the construction continued, you know, but even though there was a kind of perpetual suspension of constitution, which was problematic, if you should actually listen to Democrat, now we began to experience era of subversion.
All right.
Wow.
All right. So
there's a lot to talk about.
Indeed, yes, there is. And I was going to say that while the structure called Nigeria, the foundation being laid for that structure commenced in 1960, you know, just as it is sometimes with construction work at some point, the construction workers would leave site and come back later to continue. So the question is, the building blocks, all of the building materials, have they been good? Have we used the most qualitative of all of these materials to ensure exactly? Is there a need for redesign? Of course, I know there would be no need for us to bring down the structure and rebuild again. Of course, however, stay tuned on Sunday. We'll be talking more about all these issues when we bring you the special live broadcast of Nigeria's 63rd Independence. And from here in the studio, we say thank you very much to Prof for giving us such detail with regards to the history of what led to Nigeria's independence and some of the issues that traversed, you know, afterwards. Prof, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
We'll now go on a quick break and reconvene afterwards to serve you the second segment of the discussion on Daybreak. Stay with us.